Thank you very much, Brian, and it's a great pleasure to be here again this year. Let's go my first slide. There we go. So today, taking the theme of mystery, beauty, and preciousness, I've chosen to focus my paper on the acquisition of this extraordinary collection of Fabergé, one of the great creators of beautiful and precious objects of the late 19th and early 20th century. And I've actually been researching and studying this collection and exhibiting this collection for over 20 years. And in recent times, my research has very much focused on the production of a catalogue raisonné of the collection, which Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, being very appreciative of Fabergé's work, like generations of the royal family before her, was very keen to see completed. Sadly, I wasn't able to fulfill that task before Her late Majesty's death, but I'm pleased to say that I'm hopeful it will see the light of day in the next year or so, probably with the accompanying support, I'm very lucky to say, of His Majesty the King, who's a great admirer of Fabergé's craftsmanship, having acquired several pieces for his own private collection. And in approaching this paper, I was conscious that several of my fellow speakers, including my predecessor, would be discussing treasuries, Kunstkammer or Wunderkammer. And so I thought it would be an interesting exercise to consider how the extraordinary collection of Fabergé in the Royal Collection might be contextualized as a kind of 19th or 20th century treasury, not a treasury in the true sense of the word, but with the passage of time, Fabergé's obviously having ceased work over a century ago, is it time to really reevaluate his work? I think it would be hard to argue against the premise that his works represent beautiful objects made of precious materials, but were they treated by their royal owners as equivalent to an 18th or 19th century treasury? So let's delve into the collection and the history of its formation and see. Numbering over 100 objects, numbering over 900 objects, the precise number of the works, in fact, has fluctuated in recent years as a result of my research, because I've identified many new pieces and also discounted others that had been misattributed. While quite a number of others, of course, have come to light following the death of Her late Majesty and His late Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So the collection, in spite of its enormous scale, may no longer be the largest in existence. In fact, the largest collection that has been formed in recent years is in the Fabergé Museum in St. Petersburg, which perhaps some of you may have seen. The royal collection of Fabergé is nonetheless regarded as exceptional for two reasons. Firstly, in its diversity. You can see a few examples of pieces on the screen, and it's really representative of every single type of object which Fabergé and his workshops produced, from relatively ordinary table silver to the most elaborate jeweled Easter eggs. And secondly, the other exceptional quality to this collection is the manner in which it was formed. The collection is the product of 6 successive generations of royal collecting and accumulation, from the reign of Queen Victoria to that of His Majesty King Charles III. And this makes it really entirely unique in the royal collection for being the only artist or maker that so many generations of the royal family have sought to commission or acquire. That said, it is unique in being the only extant collection to have been formed for the most part prior to the Russian Revolution of 1917, with the largest part acquired during the reigns of Edward VII and George V. And this makes it comparable only to the original Russian imperial families' collections, which of course were subsequently confiscated, dispersed and sold by the revolutionary government. By 1887, Queen Victoria had succeeded in the ambition she had shared with Prince Albert to marry her children and her grandchildren into the most significant royal and princely houses of Europe. And her dynastic ambition realized, she chose the Danish artist Lawrence Regnier Tuxen to paint 3 generations of her family in the Green Drawing Room at Windsor Castle. And this was to mark her Golden Jubilee, which took place that year. And it's notable that almost all of those depicted in this painting were either existing clients or were to become clients of the Fabergé firm, an illustration of his reach and success and the role of dynastic heritage. 11 years later, in October 1896, Queen Victoria received her favourite granddaughter, Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna, born Princess Alix of Hesse, consort of the last Emperor of Russia, Nicholas II, and they stayed at Balmoral Castle for a holiday for 10 days. And this photograph is one of many recorded during that visit, and it also shows the future King Edward VII, who was the Emperor's uncle, and Nicholas and Alexandra's first child, Grand Duchess Olga. By this date, Queen Victoria had already made several purchases with the Fabergé firm, and her account ledgers refer to payments made in 1895 and then again in 1897 for brooches, etc., probably in connection with her Diamond Jubilee. So these were items that she purchased to give away. But for that highly significant occasion, Nicholas II and Alexandra and their siblings commissioned Carl Fabergé to make a brooch for the Queen. And it takes the form, as you can see here, of a silver and gold heart set with brilliant diamonds, surmounted by a cabochon sapphire and with 2 further sapphires suspended from a diamond pompille. And the heart encloses diamond-set Slavonic characters for the number 60, thereby corresponding to the 60 years of her reign. The brooch cost 1,055 rubles, and the Queen, clearly delighted with it, chose to wear it for official celebrations of her Jubilee on the 23rd of June that year. And in a telegram offering their congratulations, the Emperor and Empress wrote to the Queen, and I quote, "Touched you wore our present." Queen Victoria's patronage of Fabergé and acquisition through gifts from her Russian relatives was in fact to set the pattern for all future acquisitions of Fabergé that now constitute this remarkable collection. And that sort of duality of patronage and collecting, and, one could argue, the stratospheric success which the firm began to enjoy, was largely attributable to 2 Danish princesses, Alexandra, the consort of Edward VII, whom she married in 1863, and Dagmar, the consort of Alexander III, who took the name Maria Fyodorovna on her marriage to the Russian Emperor in 1866. As I've said, these princesses were the daughters of King Christian IX and Queen Louise of Denmark, and their adoration of Fabergé's work would help to transform his business into a nationwide enterprise with branches in Moscow, Kiev, and Odessa, and ultimately into an international endeavour with the opening of the London branch, located first at Berners Hotel and then at 48 Dover Street, and finally, and very prominently, alongside the finest jewellers in London at 173 New Bond Street. And this branch, which was for retail only, there were no workshops in London, all the works were created in Russia, catered for the needs of the King and Queen, their family, and their circle of friends and admirers. But it was also from where sales trips were made to the continent in order to serve the demands of European royalty, and even as far afield as to the royal family of Thailand. Now, it's not really within the scope of my lecture today to examine Carl Fabergé's career in detail, but what I want to do is to look at what is relevant to the theme of my talk and to think in brief about Fabergé's training and the main influences on his work, which ultimately led to imperial and royal patronage and made him the most successful Russian goldsmith and jeweller of the 19th and 20th century. Carl's father, Gustav, was of French Huguenot extraction, and he was born in 1814 and became a master goldsmith in St. Petersburg in 1841, having been apprenticed to Johann Cable. And he opened a workshop in St. Petersburg in the same year, so he did establish the business. But in 1860, Gustav decided to move his family, including Peter Carl, who'd been born in 1846, to Dresden. And it was there that Carl attended a commercial course and became fascinated by the great Baroque treasury of the Green Vault. And there, with its exotic and precious stones, notably pieces made by the Dinglinger family, which showed technical virtuosity and complexity, and most importantly, combined metalwork, enameling, and the use of precious and semi-precious stones, often in equal measure, so that no one element detracted from another. I think we can see this influence beginning to exercise itself on Fabergé's work. And one of the things that he was particularly fascinated by were, of course, those incredible automata that we find in the Green Vault in Dresden. And I think this was absolutely the foundation in his mind of how he would treat that amazing series of 50 Imperial Easter Eggs that he would go on to create for the Russian imperial family. So in completion of his training, Carl Fabergé travelled to Frankfurt, where he was apprenticed to the jeweller Friedmann. And he also visited Florence and Paris, although those visits are so far not supported by any contemporary documentary evidence, and their precise details are still really unknown. But he returned to St. Petersburg in 1870 as a fully fledged craftsman, ready to take over his father's business. And one of the most successful parts of his early career was in 1882, when he and his craftsmen, in particular the goldsmith Eric Collin, who was the first head workmaster of the Fabergé firm, were inspired to make reproductions of the Scythian antiquities discovered at Kirch. And the resulting jewellery was exhibited at the Pan-Russian exhibition in Moscow in 1882. And contemporary accounts of that exhibition record that Fabergé's work was extremely highly regarded, and the pieces exhibited, you can see examples of them on the screen there, were immediately recognized as objets d'art, standing apart from the other more mass-produced style of jewelry that was otherwise exhibited by other makers. And the popular Russian journal Niva dedicated an article to the reproductions the firm had produced. And the resulting display, having attracted so much attention, also attracted the attention of the emperor and empress, who purchased a pair of cufflinks in the form of cicadas. So that public and imperial recognition of his gold jewellery marked a major turning point in Fabergé's career. And 3 years later, on the 1st of May 1885, Carl Fabergé was awarded with the official title of supplier to the imperial court, with the right to bear the imperial coat of arms, which was incorporated into his maker's mark. But what it also demonstrates is Fabergé's continuing interest in embracing historic styles and techniques as representations of the wider world. And these specimen examples in the Royal Collection became an extension of the concept of the Wunderkammer with their precious materials and emulation of earlier artistic traditions. You can see the original Scythian examples, so top left and bottom right. And then you can see how Collin really was inspired by the treatment of the gold, the form of the gold, to incorporate these into more contemporary pieces for the Fabergé firm. So following in Queen Victoria's wake, Edward VII and particularly Queen Alexandra became huge admirers and collectors of Fabergé's work. And I just wanted to show you a few pieces here. Queen Alexandra was essentially vying with her sister, the Empress Marie Feodorovna, to acquire the finest pieces or even to commission the pieces that she wanted to have for her collection. And you see examples of the kinds of things that formed the basis of Queen Alexandra's collection here. And many of these pieces, although purchased by Queen Alexandra directly from the London branch, many were actually given to her as gifts, whether from family or from friends and people in the circle, the sort of Marlborough House set, if you like, of Edward VII and Queen Alexandra. And these pieces were often sent for anniversaries, for birthdays, for weddings, but they were also given as gifts when the families met each other. So when the Russian and English and the Danish royal families would meet up either in England, in Denmark, or in Russia, they would exchange Fabergé as gifts. And this is what explains how, this incredible scale of the collection as we see it today. And Queen Alexandra's taste really was for specific types of objects. According to the manager of the London branch, Henry Charles Bainbridge, the Queen preferred the more modest pieces with a strict price bracket of £50. In many instances, that price bracket was somewhat exceeded. So, for example, you see on the screen here one of 26 examples of Fabergé flowers which Queen Alexandra acquired. The Royal Collection contains the largest collection of Fabergé flowers in the world, probably around 50 or 80. We say somewhere between 50 or 80 of these flowers were made. And they are really extraordinary because they combine all of those techniques for which Fabergé really is famed. So first of all, the use of the Russian hardstones. We've heard a lot about hardstones from the previous speaker. But here, the chrysanthemum flower, instantly recognizable, is not sitting in a glass vase of water. It's sitting in a solid piece of rock crystal, which has been carved and polished by hand to look as though the stem is sitting and refracted through the glass by the water. The flower heads are enameled very delicately to look as naturalistic as possible. And of course, the gold stems hold the entire thing together. And this particular flower was a gift from Stanislas Poklowski-Kozil, who was counselor at the Russian embassy in London. And it was purchased at a cost well over £50 of 117 and given to Queen Alexandra when he was staying with the King and Queen at Sandringham House. And we know that these flower bouquets were very much influenced by bouquets, 18th century jewel bouquets, which had been produced by the court jeweler to Catherine the Great, Jérémie Posier, but they were also inspired by Chinese hardstone carvings of flowers. And they're an example of how Fabergé really used the materials and the skills of his craftsmen to sort of push the boundaries of traditional Russian hardstone carving, which of course is usually on an enormous scale. So he reduced the scale, and the same can be seen in this example of an animal. This is Queen Alexandra's dormouse, carved from a beautiful piece of agate, which has been specially selected to replicate the colouring of the animal. He has cabochon sapphire eyes, he's chewing on gold straws, and he has platinum whiskers. But taking the whimsical side out of it, Queen Alexandra formed the largest collection of animals, Fabergé animals, anywhere in the world. We have over 350 animals in the royal collection, and she was extremely proud of this collection. Frames, of course, were also, and sort of desk accessories were also part of Fabergé's production. And this really mirrored the rise in the popularity of photography. Queen Alexandra was an extremely accomplished photographer in her own right. This particular frame, which has a coloured photograph and mounted on a bowenite column, was acquired as a gift to commemorate the silver jubilee of Christian IX and Queen Louise. Now, the private apartments of Queen Alexandra rather groaned with photographs of family, and she, as I've said, was an accomplished amateur photographer herself. And she received numerous gifts of Fabergé frames from family, which became deeply treasured mementos. So while many of these were, as you can see, densely displayed in her private rooms, others, particularly those in jeweled frames, were reverently placed in cabinets for display to guests and for safekeeping. Exquisitely enamelled boxes and frames of gold, hard stones, and set with seed pearls or diamonds made by Fabergé really followed that rich tradition of particularly French 18th century jewelled and gold snuff boxes. And they often incorporated the same treatment of gold mounts with similar chasing and the addition of gem set elements or seed pearl borders. You can see a few examples here. And Fabergé also wanted to emulate that long-standing European tradition of incorporating imagery of places or buildings of great significance. And he applied this, of course, to Russian subject matter. And so top left, you can see this beautiful cloisonné enamel box produced by Fyodor Rukut, who was based in the Moscow workshops, with this beautiful en plein enamel image of the Kremlin from across the Moskva River. And then on the right, a group of boxes, all in the Royal Collection, which, of course, were made to celebrate the tercentenary of the Romanov dynasty in 1913, and quite rightly show reproductions of Falconet's monument to Peter the Great, originally erected in St. Petersburg in 1782. And Fabergé decided to extend this idea to a range of boxes and also frames, to places of significance to the British royal family. And so we see here pieces collected by Edward VII, by Queen Alexandra, but also George V and Queen Mary. And these included views of their beloved Sandringham house. We have Queen Alexandra's dairy on the top right, and then a bonbonniere in the centre, with which opens into two halves, one side showing a view of Balmoral Castle and the other of Windsor Castle. So thinking about Queen Alexandra's collection, was it a treasury or is it just an accessory? Well, I think in conclusion, on that particular topic, I would say it's probably a mixture of both. But when we look at this slightly later view of the White Drawing Room at Sandringham House, you can see these there's one cabinet here, there's another one off camera here. And these were specifically installed into the White Drawing Room at Sandringham only to hold Queen Alexandra's Fabergé collection, which she crammed into these cabinets. And these were amongst the first to ever be electrically lit in a royal residence, so that she could share and show off her collection to family and guests at the house. This is a slightly different approach to her collection. Here we see, of course, before the King and Queen married, their home as Prince and Princess of Wales was Marlborough House in London. And here, in a photograph taken by Queen Alexandra herself, this is in her own sitting room, we see a table groaning with Fabergé animals. All of these are Fabergé animals. But here, you can just about see this clock. So there was a slightly eclectic sense of the distribution of her collection, particularly at this time when she was Princess of Wales. King Edward VII was a fervent admirer of Fabergé's work and acquired a considerable collection through a variety of means. And in 1908, he made a state visit to Russia to visit his nephew, the Emperor Nicholas II. And this was a very unusual state visit because it was conducted entirely afloat, as it was considered too dangerous for the king to set foot on Russian soil. And the two families, therefore, bobbed up and down between their various royal yachts, the King and Queen on the Victoria and Albert, and the Russian imperial family on their two yachts, Standard and the Polar Star. And during the visit, of course, there was the traditional exchange of gifts, and the emperor presented the king with an official gift made by Fabergé, this very large nephrite bowl, enameled and gem set. And its commissioning as a diplomatic gift through the imperial cabinet was nothing new for Fabergé, as he regularly made a variety of gifts to be presented to dignitaries either at home or abroad in the name of the emperor. The rise of cigarette and cigar smoking, of course, eventually superseded that of the taking of snuff, and Fabergé responded accordingly by producing some of the most sumptuously decorated and elegant smoking accessories, of which the king was to form a large collection. In 1903, his sister-in-law, Maria Fyodorovna, commissioned this beautiful two-coloured gold cigarette case set with the monogram of the king and queen as a 40th wedding anniversary present. And a few years later, in 1908, the king was given this astonishingly beautiful enamelled case by his mistress, Mrs. George Keppel. I think it's probably one of the most sumptuous and elegant pieces made by the firm, and it demonstrates the exemplary guilloché enamelling for which Fabergé became rightly renowned. You can see also that it's very richly set with a diamond-set snake eating its tail, the symbol, of course, of everlasting love. And the fact that the case is overtly in Art Nouveau style was a very interesting departure, because Fabergé rarely or didn't embrace the Art Nouveau style at all. And this is makes this piece even more exceptional, I suppose. In fact, he was criticized at the Exposition Universelle in Paris for his neoclassical designs in 1900. In spite of that, he did win a very major prize at that particular exhibition. But he was criticized for not using this style, and I would like to think that had the revolution not happened, I could imagine that he would have worked a great deal more in this particular realm. What is also interesting about this box, and I think illustrates that not just that love of Fabergé, but the sense that these pieces are precious and important and beautiful, is that after the king's death, Queen Alexandra very specifically gave this cigarette case back to Mrs. Keppel as a memento of the king. But she, in turn, gave it several years later to Queen Mary, in fact, more than 2 decades later, in 1936. And so therefore it came back into royal ownership. So we're very grateful for that because it is one of the most beautiful pieces. And while many of these cases were clearly used, and we have invoices for repairs for several of the cigarette cases that were sent back to Fabergé for repair, many of them were displayed and admired in vitrines and cases around the royal palaces. And the collection was considerably added to by King George V and King George VI. Edward VII acquired many other pieces which were deeply connected to his personal interests, from cigar cases and lighters to frames and other objects in his racing colours, and of course to pieces of sculpture. And it's incredibly rare for Fabergé, in fact, to work or to use silver for modelling sculpture. But here we have a portrait model of his most successful racehorse, Persimmon, made in 1908, modelled from life when Fabergé sent his craftsman to England to carry out the only documented commission placed by a member of the royal family. And this is known as the Sandringham Commission. And here, these are pieces which came into the collection either through gift or purchase. And this was a commission that Edward VII placed in 1907 to have portraits made of the favourite dogs and horses found on the estate at Sandringham. And these were all to be a birthday present for the Queen. And all of these pieces went on to be displayed in that in those precious vitrines in the White Drawing Room at Sandringham House. This, in fact, was the largest order ever placed with the firm in London. And as I've said, the sculptors were sent from Russia to carry out these commissions, first making the models in wax to be approved by the king, who viewed them in the Queen's dairy, and then sent back to Russia to be translated into hardstones or metals, as we see in the case of Queen Alexandra's prize-winning borzoi, Vasilka. One of the king's final purchases at the London branch was this hardstone composite carving of a Chelsea pensioner. It couldn't be more English, really. But you can see that this was, again, very exceptional. There are only 2 figures made by the Fabergé firm that represent English types. The others are all portraits of Russian figures, including actual portraits. And so you see on the screen here the personal bodyguards, Kamakazaks, of Empress Maria Feodorovna and of his wife, Nicholas II's wife, Empress Alexandra. And these miniature commemorative portraits are really remarkable examples of how Fabergé again used the skill of his lapidary carvers to create these exceptional pieces, which are in fact incredibly rare. Very small number of figures were made by the firm, probably around 25 to 30. So these are extremely rare. Moving towards the acquisitions of the next generation of the family, George V and Queen Mary were to add a considerable number of pieces. Queen Mary had a particular fondness for Fabergé, but that was equally shared, in fact, with the king. And for their coronation, they were presented with this large rock crystal vase mounted in gold and gem set in a sort of near-Renaissance style with this kind of strapwork enamel decoration. And this was delivered to Buckingham Palace on the morning of their coronation, filled with orchids grown at Gunnersbury as a present from Leopold de Rothschild. And in the course of my research, I was looking through photographs of Fabergé's workshops, and I found an image of this vase here, completely unmounted. So whether it was a kind of rushed commission, it seems that it may well have been, and that suddenly something had to be sent to London, because what I've also subsequently discovered is that in the archive of the Royal Society of Sculptors, that the coat of arms, which actually I'm not showing you here, rather annoyingly, but on the other side of here, you can just about see the date inscribed. On the other side is the British Royal Arms. And there wasn't time to send this object back to have the Royal Arms engraved in Russia. And so, in fact, this was carried out by a sculptor in London, a medalist and seal engraver called Cecil Thomas. And he records that he did the engraving using a dental drill. It's very, very fine, but this is rock crystal. This is solid rock crystal, which, as you know, is extremely friable and very difficult to work with. So thankfully, it survived the process. George V was particularly keen on adding to the collection of animal carvings. And in this photograph of the London branch at 173 New Bond Street, you can just see here this amazing carving of a water buffalo, which is carved in translucent chalcedony with ivory horns. And on the left of the screen, you can see the original invoice. This is a rare occasion where we still have the invoice for the purchase. And you can see on the same day, he bought a bear, a kangaroo, a camel, and some cigarette cases. The king and queen also commissioned pieces, and so for the investiture of their son, the future Edward VIII, for his investiture as Prince of Wales in 1911, George V purchased at a cost of £67 and 10 shillings this beautiful carved cameo in smoky topaz on a silver and gold diamond set mount. And on the right of the screen, you can see this is the original record of the production of this piece. You can see a sort of prototype drawing for the A-frame mount. And this is from an album of drawings from the workshop of Henrik Wigström, who was the final head workmaster for the Fabergé firm. And this album was discovered in Finland. A lot of Fabergé's craftsmen came from Finland. You can think about the proximity of St. Petersburg to Finland, which explains that. And this was found within the last couple of decades. And so, again, greatly adding to our knowledge about these pieces, which was previously impossible to add information because until the 1990s, of course, it was impossible to get really much out of the archives in Russia. Queen Mary encompassed in her taste for Fabergé, she loved flowers and she added this beautiful study of bleeding heart. And she also loved boxes. And here are some examples. The nephrite box at the top was a Christmas present to her in 1912 from Empress Marie Feodorovna. And this really, I think, is a classic example, with this wonderful moss agate set into the 4-color gold box below. I mean, this box really could have been made in the 18th century. It's just so extraordinary and beautiful. And that, in fact, was a Christmas present to her in 1894 from Emperor Nicholas II and Empress Alexandra. I think when we consider how Queen Mary displayed her collection, and again, coming back to this point of was it a treasury? Well, you can see here, in this case, a number of really important Fabergé pieces, including an Imperial Easter egg here. But it's muddled in with many other extraordinary pieces, some of which are extremely well known. But this is a sort of indication of how Queen Mary kept her collection. She did keep it in cabinets. It was very specifically organized, although maybe it doesn't look like it. And it was eclectic, and she gathered together the pieces that she felt were precious to her. And I think that really is an example of how she considered her collection. It tells you a great deal. Of course, if ever Fabergé considered himself as a successor to the tradition of producing objects of wonder, it was surely in the production of his Imperial Easter Eggs that he falls closest to it. And the role of the dealer and of purchasers at auction, of course, became important in the collecting of George V and Queen Mary, because their acquisitions both sort of straddled both the pre- and the post-revolutionary era in Russia. And so, of course, whilst they acquired pieces given as gifts by their family, and they were purchasing pieces at the London branch, they were also acquiring pieces that had actually belonged to their Russian family. And the Imperial Easter Eggs, of course, are a case in point. And we see on the screen here the Imperial Easter Egg for 1901. Handily has the date set in diamonds. And this was made as the Easter gift for Empress Alexandra Feodorovna in 1901. You probably know that the first Imperial Easter egg was made in 1885, and one a year was made until 1894 and the death of Alexander III. And then 2 a year were made thereafter, which with the emperor presenting one to his mother and one to his consort. And this was acquired by Queen Mary in 1933. We don't know exactly where she purchased it, but it's quite likely that it came from Wartski. And then a few years later, 2 years earlier, in 1931, she acquired the Imperial Easter egg for 1910. This is the colonnade egg, so-called, I think for obvious reasons, carved from bowenite. The egg, in fact, forms a rotary clock at the top of the object. So this is again, not an example of an egg with an automata, but it does have a function. And this is an allegory of the imperial family, the platinum doves in the centre representing Nicholas II and Alexandra, and the 4 female figures around the base representing their 4 daughters, and the little putti on the top representing the long-awaited Cesarewitch. And the final Imperial Easter egg that was purchased was acquired in 1933, purchased by George V for £250 from Cameo Corner, a shop very close to the British Museum, which some of you no doubt will have heard of. It seems like a bargain price, £250, it certainly was. And what makes that particularly ironic is that this egg, which is exceptional in its construction, you can see from this detail here, that it is in fact constructed entirely by hand from a platinum mesh, which is cut, and into which all these precious and semi-precious stones are simply held by being slotted perfectly into that mesh. It does have a gold framework inside, and then on the right you can see the surprise that is held inside it with 2 clips, which is this cameo portrait of the 5 imperial children. And this egg was actually designed by one of Fabergé's female designers, Alma Peel, who is an extremely gifted designer. But as I was saying, it's ironic that it was purchased for such a bargain price, because recent research has shown that this was in fact the most expensive imperial egg that Fabergé ever made. Moving to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, I think she's probably Queen Mary's successor in terms of her scholarship of Fabergé and her connoisseurship, and she formed a remarkably broad-ranging collection from the 1940s right up until the 1990s, much of which was housed in a latter-day cabinet of curiosities at her London home, Clarence House, which you can see on the left, and you can definitely feel a tinge of Queen Mary's sort of accumulation of pieces, although there are many pieces of Fabergé in here, including these very interesting red lead crystal and silver mounted wine decanters, and also these 2 beautiful flowers. These are probably amongst the most beautiful, which she decided to add to the collection. And you can see the cornflowers and oats on the right of the screen. That, in fact, was a joint purchase with Queen Mary in 1944 from Wartski for £144. And during the remainder of the Blitz, she decided to keep this flower in her shelter in Buckingham Palace, where she would have to retreat to in case of bombing, which seems like a very slightly risky thing to do. And she, in a note to Queen Mary, she described this flower as a charming thing and remarkably unwarlike, which indeed it is. And the oats are in fact mounted en tremblant, so with any slight movement, you get that wonderful sense of life. And then to the left, she added 3 years later this remarkable and exceptional study of buttercups and cornflowers, even mounted with a jewelled bee resting on one of the flowers. And that was for the slightly larger sum of £375. George VI also added a number of really important pieces, and they included this remarkable presentation box. And I think this probably is one of the most exceptional examples of guilloché enameling with this incredible moiré pattern and this wonderful pale mauve colour. And Fabergé, in fact, was commissioned, as I said earlier, to make presentation pieces which were issued in the name of the emperor. And on the right of the screen here, you can see that this box, when it was originally made, was intended just to have the cipher of the emperor. So this was a slightly lesser gift. The hierarchy of presentation gifts in Imperial Russia had not changed since the reign of Peter the Great. And according to your rank in Russian society, a gift, if you were to be the lucky recipient of one, would be matched to equate to that same rank. But here you see that there was a little bit of an upgrade, and the box, in fact, was ultimately set with the painted miniature of the emperor, heavily diamond set, and this meant it was to go to someone much more important. And in fact, we do now know that it was given to the Russian Privy Councillor Artur Germanovich Rafalovich in 1914, so a very late presentation piece. In the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, a number of pieces were added to the collection of Fabergé, and these were, until very recently, thought to be largely in the form of personal purchases, mostly from the firm of Wartski, such as the blue enamel clock on the left of the screen. However, in recent months, I have had to reevaluate Her late Majesty's contribution to the collection, having discovered more than 25 pieces which were personally acquired by her, largely through gift, and which were previously completely unrecorded by the Royal Collection, having been discovered amongst Her Majesty's personal effects. And those, I'm hoping, will be included in my catalogue when it eventually sees the light of day. In the centre of the screen, you can see this rather humorous carving of a frog on a pink guilloche enamel hand seal, the matrix having been replaced with the cipher of the Prince of Wales, now King Charles III. And this, in fact, was a wedding present to the King as Prince of Wales on the occasion of his marriage to Lady Diana Spencer in 1981. And the pose of the frog isn't really just folly, although it is actually sort of rather charming. In fact, it is now known to be a reproduction of a bronze original by the French sculptor Emmanuel Frémier. And on the right, you can see a star-shaped desk clock. This was inherited by the late Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, from his aunt, Queen Louise of Sweden, following her death in 1965. And she had been given the clock by the Duke of Edinburgh's grandmother, Queen Olga of Greece, born Grand Duchess Olga Constantine of Russia, and very much a reminder, of course, of the Duke's Romanov heritage. Two more contemporary acquisitions demonstrate this shared love of Fabergé between Queen Elizabeth II and His Majesty King Charles III. And on the left, a magnificent jewelled gold presentation box, again with the Emperor's miniature. This was originally presented by Nicholas II to his Secretary of State, Nikolai Mansurov. And as I said, these boxes are exceptionally rare. During Nicholas II's reign, only 20 presentation boxes with the portrait miniature of Nicholas II were made, and 3 of those are now in the Royal Collection. And this particular example left Russia having been sold by the revolutionary government, and eventually it made its way into the collection of the singer, Frank Sinatra. It was then sold after his death and given as a present to Her late Majesty. And on the right of the screen is something which certainly could not be described as a Kunstkammer object, but this is a very large bell push. It's made of purple heartwood, embellished with silver mounts and a cabochon garnet push piece. But this, in fact, does have imperial provenance. It was originally used by the last empress of Russia, Alexandra Feodorovna, and it sat on her desk at the Alexandra Palace. And this was a gift to His Majesty the King as Prince of Wales in 2020. Now, before concluding, I just wanted to share some more recent discoveries, even one might say unraveling of mysteries. These are things that discoveries I've made in the course of re-examining this collection for the preparation of the catalogue. And I have to say I've been very, very fortunate to have the opportunity to do this. I mentioned the series of Easter eggs presented and made for the personal consumption of the imperial family. And this is the imperial egg for 1892. It's called the diamond trellis egg for fairly obvious reasons. And that diamond trellis is mounted onto a bowenite, carved bowenite shell. And this was presented by Alexander III to Empress Maria Feodorovna. What you can see on the left of the screen is the original silver stand. This is a historic photograph of the egg dating from the 1920s. And you can see that it was on this silver stand, thought to represent the 3 sons of the imperial couple. But also, originally inside was a surprise. And when I was cataloguing some pieces, I was looking in a cabinet, and I suddenly saw this object. And although it wasn't on my list of Fabergé pieces to catalogue, I thought it reminded me very much of the description of the surprise from that very egg. And to cut a very long story, very short, it turned out to be exactly that. Now you'll notice that this is the description, by the way, on the left, from the inventory of Maria Feodorovna's Easter eggs taken in 1892 in St. Petersburg. And this is, yes, part of the discovery process. But in any case, this takes the form of, and it looks very much like the badge of the Order of the Elephant, the most highest order of chivalry in Denmark. And of course, remember, Marie Fyodorovna is Danish. So in order to verify whether this piece was definitely the surprise, I took it to our horological conservator at the time, who instantly took it to pieces, which was quite alarming. But this was mainly because I wanted to compare it with another Fabergé elephant automaton that we actually have in the Royal Collection, because I thought I couldn't find any marks on this piece. I just felt that it was right, but I just could not solve the mystery. I needed that confirmation. And I thought, well, if we looked at the mechanism for the automaton, we might be able to compare it with the mechanism of the other elephant automaton. So we took it all to pieces, and actually it's a completely different mechanism. It's totally different. So that told me nothing. And then I started to look in detail at the way this object is constructed. You can see bottom right that something went wrong when the hole for the winding mechanism was actually put in the wrong place. So this had to be plugged by a different piece of ivory, which hasn't aged in the same way as the rest of the object. But you will see the Danish crown there. And so this was all adding to the theory that I had. And here, just to show you, these two pieces were sitting side by side in a display cabinet in Buckingham Palace. And you can see that they are really very, almost identical. However, I was then able to finally confirm that this is the missing surprise from that Fabergé egg that had not been seen since it left Russia, because the castle on the back of the elephant's back had metal fatigue. And so I took it off and looked inside, and I thought, well, why would you line the castle in fabric if you couldn't get into it? So then I thought, well, it must have a lid. So I gave it to the conservator because I didn't want to do it myself. And off the lid came, and then there were revealed the Fabergé marks. So I was able to confirm that this indeed was this missing surprise. So it's not quite the same as finding a missing Fabergé egg, but it's the next best thing. There you go, a detail of the marks. And then finally, again, in the course of my research, I've spotted many other pieces which are in fact Fabergé, but have never been included on our inventory as Fabergé. Top left, this rather elegant, almost sort of Art Deco clock carved from rhodonite. Hiding underneath, there's this rather interesting way of securing the key to wind the clock. And of course, once I'd looked at this, it revealed the marks of Henrik Wigström, the head workmaster of the Fabergé firm. And then this beautiful little agate and gem set mounted little ornament in the form of a pilgrim vase, again, was just sitting minding its own business. And I found the marks of Eric Collin alongside the marks of the Fabergé firm. Doing research in Russia has obviously been of enormous value in this process, but it's sadly not possible to go there at the moment. However, thanks to colleagues in Russia who've been so noble in sharing information, I've also been able to identify over 40 pieces as imperial commissions, and that is carried out by, thankfully, colleagues at Pavlovsk. Have documented all of the imperial purchases from Argia, the Russian State Historical Archive in St. Petersburg, and put them into this volume. And it's therefore possible for me to match the inventory number, scratched inventory number, which you see here, 58546, with the entry, and therefore, in this instance, to confirm that this was a piece purchased by Marie Fyodorovna in January 1898. And that has greatly contributed to knowledge about the collection. And then the final mystery, this is a long holy grail in a way for me. I've been looking for this object for over 20 years. And this is a beautiful cigarette case, described as a grey translucent cigarette case in the list of wedding gifts to Her late Majesty and His late Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh. And it was originally presented by Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna to her brother, Grand Duke of Hessen by Rhine. And it was given by their descendants to the late Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip as a wedding present in 1947. You can just see that this inscription has been added inside the case. But I just have looked everywhere and I could not find it. And then in the sad aftermath of the Duke of Edinburgh's death, and in cataloguing pieces from his collection, lo and behold, there it was. So it was fantastic to be able to reignite the history of this piece and to bring it into that great treasury of the rest of the collection. Thank you very much.